He baptized his mother as his wife, the hermit of the buried temple. Rotero. The high desert of Utah, in the late summer of 1973, was a place that didn't care if you lived or died. It was a 110-degree furnace of oxidized iron and juniper skeletons, a vast red emptiness that swallowed sound. This was the professional opinion of Frank Coulter. Frank was a man made of leather and skepticism, a Vietnam vet who had traded the jungle humidity for the dry bake of the American Southwest. He was a surveyor for the Department of the Interior, and he hated this assignment. They were charting the Scorpion's Tail, a newly acquired stretch of federal land, a maze of canyons and mesas that the local Paiute tribes actively avoided and the previous Mormon settlers had deemed untithable. "This place is just static," Frank mumbled, wiping the sweat and red dust from his transit level. "Nothing out here but heat and snakes." "It's beautiful, Frank. Can you dig it? It's elemental." Ben Carter, the junior man on the team, was Frank's opposite. Ben had shoulder-length hair tucked under his hard hat and believed in things like ley lines and the spiritual energy of the earth. He was here to avoid the draft lottery and find himself. Frank just found him annoying. The third member of their reluctant party was Dr. Aris Thorne. Aris was an archaeologist from the University of Chicago, sent along as a cultural monitor. The government was terrified of leveling a hidden cliff dwelling, so Aris was here to watch Frank and Ben, ensuring their seismic equipment and marker stakes didn't pulverize some priceless artifact. Aris, a man who preferred dusty libraries to actual dust, was already miserable. "The topography maps are useless, Frank. They're based on aerial surveys from the 50s. The erosion alone renders them hypothetical." "Right on," Frank said, not looking up. "Hypothetical is fine. We plant the markers where the map says we cash the per diem and we get back to Flagstaff for a cold beer. I'm not here to second-guess the U.S. Geological Survey. They were 2 weeks into the survey, camping out of 2 battered Jeeps, running low on potable water and patience. The heat was making the air shimmer, creating phantom lakes on the horizon. They were mapping a large, flat mesa that jutted out over a vast, unmapped canyon system. The air was unnaturally still, the only sound the click, click, click of Frank's Gunter's chain as Ben measured out the next station. "Hold up," Ben said, his voice cracking slightly. He was staring, not at the chain, but at the ground 50 yards ahead. "Snake?" Frank sighed, reaching for the shovel. "No, the ground." Frank and Aris walked over. The mesa was supposed to be flat, a sheet of unbroken sandstone, but it wasn't. Here, the rock dipped suddenly, forming a perfect shallow depression about the size of a suburban swimming pool. It wasn't erosion. Erosion was messy. This was smooth, almost artificial. "That's an anomaly," Aris said, his academic lethargy vanishing instantly. He knelt, brushing the sand away from the rim. "This isn't sedimentary behavior. This looks compressed." Frank spat. "It's a sinkhole, Doc. Let's mark it hazardous and move on." "No," Ben whispered, walking the perimeter. "It feels cold." It was true. The temperature inside the depression was noticeably cooler. Aris pulled out his compass. The needle spun lazily, then pointed directly at the center of the depression, quivering. "Magnetic interference," Frank offered. "Or a void," Aris said, his eyes wide. He walked to the center and stamped his boot. The sound wasn't the dull thud of solid rock. It was a hollow, resonant thump. "Far out," Ben breathed. "We're not authorized for exploration, Thorne," Frank said, his voice hardening. "We are authorized to protect cultural sites," Aris countered, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled a rock hammer from his belt. "And this, Frank, is not on the map." Aris tapped the center of the rock. A hairline fracture, invisible until he'd cleared the dust, split the surface. He tapped again, and a section of the sandstone crust, no thicker than a dinner plate, shifted and collapsed inward, revealing a perfect black square. A rush of cold, ancient air blasted upward, smelling not of dust, but of ozone, wet stone, and something else. Something sweet and spoiled, like forgotten incense. "Well, hell," Frank said, pulling the flashlight from his belt. He shone the beam into the darkness. It didn't hit a bottom. The void beneath the sandstone was not a cave. It was a shaft, and it was carved. Frank's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating walls that were too smooth, too geometric. They descended at a steep 40-degree angle, disappearing into an oppressive blackness. The shaft was just wide enough for a man to crawl, perhaps 4 feet by 4 feet. "This is Anasazi," Aris whispered, his voice trembling with the kind of excitement Frank associated with finding a full bottle of whiskey in a dry camp. "No, it's older. Pre-Clovis, maybe. Look at the tooling marks. They didn't use stone. They used something else. It's a ventilation shaft for an old mine," Frank said, though his voice lacked conviction. The air pouring out of it was too cold, too clean. "There are no mines registered in this quadrant, Frank. This is a kiva or something beyond that. This is a discovery." Aris was already uncoiling the safety rope from his pack. "We don't go down there," Frank stated. It was an order. "We're surveyors, not gophers. We radio this in. We let the people with the right helmets handle it." "Radio?" Ben scoffed, tapping the heavy receiver on his back. "We've had nothing but static since we climbed this mesa. You know that. This thing, whatever it is blocking the signal." It was true. The high iron content of the rock, or perhaps the mesa's sheer isolation, had cut them off. They were on their own. Aris looked at Frank, his face pleading. "Frank, this could be the find of the century. We are obligated to assess the integrity of the site. If it's unstable, we must know. That's in the mandate. Assess potential hazards." Frank stared into the dark hole. He hated confined spaces. He hated the unknown. But he also hated the idea of climbing all the way back to the Jeep, driving 3 hours to the canyon rim just to try the radio. He sighed, the sound loud in the sudden silence. "Fine. 1 hour, 60 minutes. We use the climbing gear. I go first. Ben takes the middle. You watch the rear, Doc. You see anything that looks like it's going to bite? You yell." The shaft was steeper than it looked. It wasn't a crawl. It was a controlled slide. They rappelled, their boots bracing against the smooth, almost polished walls. The air grew colder, and the strange, sickly sweet smell of incense and decay intensified. Frank's flashlight beam seemed to be absorbed by the darkness. It illuminated only a few feet ahead, leaving the depths below a mystery. "The air is heavy," Ben noted, his voice muffled by the rock. "My ears are popping." "We're descending rapidly," Aris called from above. "The angle is consistent. This is deliberate architecture. It's channeling us somewhere." After what felt like an eternity, Frank's feet touched solid ground. But it wasn't solid. It was soft, like damp sand or silt. "I'm down," he called out. He unclipped his harness and swept the flashlight beam around him. They were in a chamber, massive and circular. The ceiling was so high he couldn't see it, lost in the impenetrable gloom. The shaft they'd descended was just one of several dark mouths opening into this central space. The floor was covered in a fine dark silt that muffled their footsteps. "My God," Aris said, landing beside Frank. He clicked on his heavy lantern. The light flooded the space, revealing the impossible. They were not in a cave. They were standing in a temple. The light from Aris's lantern revealed a staggering, cyclopean space. The chamber was immense, perhaps 200 feet across, with a ceiling that vaulted at least 80 feet above them. But it wasn't the size that stole their breath. It was the architecture. Massive pillars, carved not from separate blocks but from the living bedrock itself, rose to support the unseen roof. The walls were not rough-hewn stone. They were covered in intricate, obsessive carvings. But the art was alien. It wasn't the geometric patterns of the Anasazi or the pictographs of the Paiute. It was a dizzying array of spirals, coiling tentacles, and shapes that seemed to shift the longer you looked at them. "This is not indigenous," Aris breathed, running his hand over a carving of a multi-limbed figure emerging from a pool of water. This is something else entirely." "It's a cathedral," Ben said, looking up into the darkness. A sunken cathedral. The silt on the floor was deep and it was damp. Frank knelt, shining his light on it. "There's water down here, a lot of it." "A cistern," Aris said, moving toward the center of the room. "A spring. That's why they built here." In the desert, water is life. Water is... He stopped. In the exact center of the chamber, where the floor should have been, there was a vast circular pool of water. It was perfectly still, black as oil, and impossibly clear. It didn't seem to be reflecting their light. It seemed to be swallowing it. "Don't get near that," Frank ordered, his hand instinctively going to the utility knife on his belt. "It's a baptismal font," Eris murmured, "or a sacrificial one." "Guys," Ben's voice was high and tight. He was pointing his flashlight not at the pool, but at the far side of the chamber. "We are not the first ones down here. Not recently, anyway." On the far wall, nearly hidden by a massive pillar, was a small, flickering light. A campfire. Frank clicked off his flashlight. Eris doused his lantern. The three men were plunged into near-total darkness, illuminated only by that single distant, trembling orange flame. They stood frozen. The only sound was the faint drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the vastness, and the sound of their own breathing. "Who the hell," Frank whispered, "camps out in a place like this?" "A hermit," Eris said, his voice low. "The legends the Paiute told me. They mentioned a man who went to ground. I thought it was folklore, a boogeyman to scare children." The silence stretched. Then, from the direction of the fire, a sound echoed across the chamber. It was a scraping sound, like stone on stone, followed by a low, monotonous chanting. It was a single male voice, singing a dirge that had no recognizable melody. "We leave," Frank said, now, slowly. "We have to document," Eris began. "We have to survive," Frank snapped. "That is not a park ranger, Doc. That is someone who does not want to be found. Back to the rope. Ben, you first." As they began to edge backward, their boots crunching in the silent silt, the chanting stopped. The sudden absence of the sound was more terrifying than the noise itself. A shadow detached itself from the pillar near the fire. It was a man, or the shape of one. He was impossibly tall and gaunt, his silhouette distorted by the flickering firelight behind him. He stood perfectly still, watching them. "He sees us," Ben whispered, his voice trembling. The man took a step toward them, out of the firelight and into the absolute darkness of the temple. He vanished, but they could hear him moving. The soft shush, shush, shush of his feet dragging through the silt, moving quickly, not toward them, but toward the wall, circling them. "Back to the rope!" Frank yelled, shoving Ben toward the shaft. He clicked on his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the darkness. He caught a flash of movement, pale skin, long matted hair, and then the man was gone, disappearing into one of the other dark tunnels that ringed the chamber. "He's flanking us!" Frank shouted. They scrambled to the rope. Ben clipped in, his hands fumbling. "Frank, I can't. The carabiner is jammed." "Give it to me." As Frank wrestled with the clip, Eris shone his lantern back toward the center of the room. "The pool," Eris gasped. "Frank, look at the pool." The water, previously still, was now disturbed. Ripples were spreading outward from the center, as if something massive had just surfaced. Or, Frank thought with a cold knot in his stomach, as if something had just been dropped in. "Get him up! Get him up now!" Frank roared. He slammed the carabiner shut on Ben's harness and slapped his back. "Go! Don't look down!" Ben, nearly hyperventilating, began his ascent, scrambling up the rope into the narrow shaft. Eris held the lantern, his beam fixed on the rippling black water. "Something is in there. Frank, something is in that water. And we're not staying to meet it. You're next, Doc." But the inhabitant, the hermit, he didn't attack, he just watched. And then he went somewhere. "He went to cut us off," Frank said, grabbing Eris by the pack. "Go, now." Eris reluctantly clipped in and began to climb. Frank took one last look around the vast, dark temple, his flashlight beam cutting the gloom. The fire in the distance was still flickering. The scraping sound had returned, louder this time. Scrape, drag, scrape. "Frank, hurry!" Ben's voice echoed down the shaft. Frank clipped in, put his weight on the rope, and began the arduous climb, his body heavy with dread. As he ascended, he looked down one last time into the blackness of the sunken cathedral. In the center of the chamber, illuminated by the distant campfire, the hermit had returned. He was standing at the edge of the black pool. He was not alone. He was dragging something, a large, dark bundle. Frank froze, his blood turning to ice. The hermit was chanting again, a low, guttural monotone. He lifted the bundle. It looked like a human body wrapped in hides, and with a great heave he rolled it into the pool. The splash was deafening in the silence. It echoed up the shaft like a gunshot. Frank climbed, his muscles burning, not daring to look down again. He climbed until his hands were raw and the cold, damp air of the temple was replaced by the suffocating 110-degree heat of the Utah desert. He burst out onto the mesa, collapsing onto the hot sandstone, gasping in the blinding sunlight. Ben was curled in a fetal position nearby, shaking. Eris was on his hands and knees, vomiting onto the rock. "What was that?" Ben whimpered. "What did he put in the water?" "A sacrifice," Eris choked out, wiping his mouth. He was feeding it." Frank stood up, his face a mask of grim determination. He walked to the hole and, using his shovel and the largest rocks he could find, he began to cover the opening. "What are you doing?" Eris yelled. "We can't seal it. That's an unparalleled archaeological site." "It's a tomb, Doc," Frank said, straining as he rolled a boulder over the shaft. "And whatever is down there, it's staying down there." "We can't just leave him," Ben cried. "He's not trapped," Frank said, his voice low and cold. "Did you see those other tunnels? That place is a maze. He has other ways out. This is just so we can't get back in." They worked for an hour, sealing the hole with rocks and silt until it was impossible to tell it had ever been opened. The anomaly was still there, the shallow depression in the rock, but the entrance was gone. "The equipment," Eris said numbly, pointing to their packs. "The ropes. We left the climbing gear down there." "It's a write-off," Frank said. He picked up his transit and tripod. "The job is over. We're packing up. We hike back to the jeeps tonight. We drive out at dawn. We tell the department the ground is unstable and unsurveyable. End of story." "We can't," Eris argued, his face pale but his eyes burning with a feverish light. "Frank, you don't understand what we saw. Those carvings. That ritual. This is a functioning pre-Columbian cult. This changes everything." "It changes nothing," Frank snapped. "We saw nothing. We saw a shadow in a cave. We panicked. We left." "You got it, Doc? That's the story. Because the other story, the one with the thing in the water, that one gets us put in a quiet room with soft walls." Ben just stared at the spot where the hole had been. "He was baptizing it, wasn't he? The bundle. He was pushing it under." Frank grabbed Ben by the shirt. "Listen to me, kid. You didn't see anything. It was a trick of the light. Heat exhaustion. We're all seeing things. Now pack your gear. We're walking." They packed in silence, the desert sun beating down on them, but the heat of the day couldn't bake away the absolute, profound cold that had settled deep in their bones. The cold of the buried temple. They hiked for 2 hours in the brutal late afternoon sun, moving away from the hazardous mesa and toward the ridge where they'd left the jeeps. The silence was thick, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the gravel. Frank pushed them hard, wanting to put as much distance as possible between them and the anomaly before dark. But the desert was unforgiving. As the sun began to bleed purple and orange against the western cliffs, Ben stumbled, his ankle twisting on a loose rock. He went down hard. "I can't," he panted, his face pale with pain and exhaustion. "Frank, I can't walk on it." His ankle was already swelling, blue and purple in the twilight. Frank cursed. They were still 5 miles from the jeeps, and the temperature was about to plummet, as it always did in the high desert. "We make camp," Frank declared, dropping his pack. "Eris, get the medical kit. Ben, you start a fire. We'll splint the ankle and move out slow tomorrow." They were in a small, defensible box canyon, sheltered from the wind. As Ben fumbled with the flint and steel, Frank didn't trust him with the lighter fluid. Eris worked on the ankle, his movements precise and academic. The fire caught, and the 3 men huddled around it, the flames painting their faces in flickering shades of orange. The isolation felt absolute. "He knew we were there," Ben said suddenly, staring into the flames. He wasn't surprised. "He's a hermit," Frank said, cleaning his knife. "He's probably just tweaked out on peyote and loneliness." "No," Eris said, finishing the bandage. "It wasn't madness. It was purpose. What we saw was a ritual, I've read about them. Chthonic cults. Cults that worship things from the earth. The deity of the silt, as some texts call it. Frank snorted. You're getting far out on me now, Doc. Am I, Frank? You saw the carvings. You saw the water. You saw him. That was not a man hiding from the world. That was a man serving it. The fire crackled, spitting an ember onto Ben's boot. He didn't flinch. The bundle, Ben whispered. It wasn't hides. I saw it when he lifted it. It was white. Frank and Aris looked at him. Like fabric. Old fabric. Lace, maybe. Like a wedding dress. A coyote howled in the distance, a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to snake down Frank's spine. That's crazy, kid, Frank said too quickly. He was chanting, Ben continued, his eyes wide and unfocused. I didn't recognize the words, but I recognized the rhythm. It was like, I baptize thee. Over and over. I baptize thee. Aris leaned in, the academic in him overriding his fear. What else, Ben? What did you hear? I don't know, Ben said, shaking his head. It was just wrong. He wasn't feeding it. He was marrying it, or marrying something to it. And the bundle, it was so small. Frank stood up, agitated. He paced the edge of the firelight. You're both spooked. We found a crazy guy in a cave. He was throwing his garbage in a pond. We're hiking out tomorrow, and we are never speaking of this again. His garbage? Aris challenged, his voice rising. Did you smell the air in that place, Frank? That incense? That wasn't patchouli. That was myrrh and copal. That was preservation. He wasn't discarding that bundle. He was consecrating it. Aris pulled a small leather-bound notebook from his pocket and began sketching furiously by the firelight. What are you doing? Frank demanded. I'm documenting. I'm drawing the glyphs I saw on the pillar. Aris sketched a series of coiling spirals that intersected with sharp, triangular shapes. They're primitive, but the complexity is astounding. It's a language. It tells a story. It's graffiti, Doc. Put it away. It's a story, Aris insisted, his eyes fever bright. The spiral is the water. The triangle is the bride. And this shape here, the one that looks like an eye, that's the thing in the pool. The groom. He's offering it a wife. Stop it, Ben whimpered. Please, just stop. A rock clattered from the rim of the canyon, high above them. Frank froze. He doused the fire with the dregs of his canteen, plunging them into darkness. Frank, Ben hissed. Shh. Frank stared up at the black silhouette of the canyon rim against the starry sky. There was nothing. Just the wind. It was a coyote, Aris said, his voice shaky. Coyotes don't knock rocks loose like that, Frank whispered. He unholstered the .45 pistol he kept in his pack. He wasn't supposed to have it on a federal survey, but he'd learned in the Mekong Delta that regulations were suggestions. He followed us, Ben breathed. He can't have, Aris argued. We covered the hole. We hiked for hours. He couldn't know where we went. He doesn't need to see us, Frank said, his eyes scanning the darkness. He just needs to know the high ground, and this is his ground. Another rock clattered, this time closer. Stay down, Frank ordered. Don't make a sound. They sat in the dark, chilled by the desert night, listening. The only sound was the wind, which seemed to be picking up, whistling through the canyons. But underneath the wind, Frank thought he heard something else. A low, monotonous sound. The chanting. It was miles away, but the acoustics of the canyon were carrying it, amplifying it. The hermit of the buried temple was still at his work. Dawn broke cold and gray. The chanting had stopped hours ago, but sleep had been impossible. Frank, who had stood watch all night, looked ragged. Aris's academic curiosity had been replaced by a pale, twitchy anxiety. Ben's ankle was the size of a grapefruit. He can't walk on that, Aris stated the obvious. He doesn't have to, Frank said. He packed the last of their gear. We're 5 miles from the jeeps. I'll go. I'll take the radio. I'll get to high ground, call for extraction, and come back with the jeep. You're splitting us up? Ben asked, his voice cracking. That's a bad idea, man. It's the only idea. You stay here with the doc. Keep the fire low. Don't wander off. Frank looked at Aris. You keep him safe. Use the pistol if you have to, but only if you see him. Don't go shooting at shadows." Eris nodded, taking the heavy .45 with an unsteady hand. Frank adjusted his pack, took a long pull from the canteen, and started the trek out of the box canyon, his boots crunching on the loose gravel. He moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to be away from this place. The topography was brutal. He had to climb out of the canyon system, navigating washes and steep scree slopes. After 2 hours, he reached the ridge where they had left the jeeps. They were gone. Frank stared. The tire tracks were still there, clear in the dust. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, just gone. "No," he whispered. He ran to the edge of the ridge, scanning the valley below. Nothing. He pulled out the radio, extended the antenna, and began to speak. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Interior Survey Team Delta. We are stranded. Scorpion's Tail Mesa, Quadrant 4, requesting immediate extraction. Over." Only static answered. A thick, whining hiss, just like on the mesa. "Damn it." He tried again. "Mayday. This is Frank Coulter. Does anyone read me?" Over. The static hissed, and then, for a split second, a voice cut through. It was high and sing-song. "Baptize thee." Frank dropped the radio as if it were burning. The voice hadn't come from the radio. It had come from behind him. He spun around. The hermit was standing 10 feet away, silhouetted against the rising sun. He was just as they'd seen him in the temple, impossibly tall and gaunt, wrapped in filthy rags, his matted hair hanging to his waist. His face was a mask of dirt and sun-scorched skin, but his eyes were horribly clear, blue and bright as gas flames. He was holding Frank's keys. He dangled them from one long, dirt-encrusted finger. You drove the jeeps?" Frank stammered. The hermit tilted his head. He didn't speak. He just smiled, revealing teeth that were worn down to nubs. "Where are they?" Frank demanded, his hand moving toward the knife on his belt. The hermit pointed, not down the road, but over the edge of the cliff. Frank walked slowly to the precipice and looked down. 1,000 feet below, at the bottom of the canyon, lay the mangled, burning wreckage of both jeeps. The hermit had driven them straight off the cliff. "You son of a..." Frank lunged with the knife. He was fast, but the hermit was faster. The man didn't move like a human. He flowed, sidestepping the lunge like a matador. Frank stumbled past him, catching his balance on the loose rock. The hermit just watched him, that same empty, placid smile on his face. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He was welcoming. "You stranded us," Frank panted, raising the knife again. The hermit shook his head slowly. Then he spoke. His voice was not the guttural chant Frank expected. It was soft, reedy, and had a faint, old-world accent. "Not stranded, no," the hermit said. "Invited. We're leaving." "But you were witnesses," the hermit said, his smile fading into confusion. "The purification was complete. The bride is consecrated. You were supposed to stay for the union." "We're not staying for anything. You're insane." "I am Malachi," the hermit said, as if that explained everything. "And this is my parish. You came into my church. You disturbed the water. The groom. He does not like to be disturbed." Frank backed away slowly. "We're walking out. Stay away from us." "But you can't walk out," Malachi said, his voice full of a strange, gentle pity. "You don't know the way. You have been walking the wrong way. You've been walking in circles. You are much closer to the temple than you are to the road." Frank's blood ran cold. He looked at the sun. It was in the wrong place. He'd been navigating by instinct, but the canyons had turned him around. He hadn't been hiking away from the mesa. He'd been hiking alongside it. "You're lying." Malachi pointed down into the box canyon where Frank had left the others. "They are waiting for you, but they are not alone. I came to fetch the witness who ran." "You stay away from them!" Frank screamed, and he charged again. This time, Malachi didn't move. He simply raised one hand. Frank felt, rather than saw, something moving on the ground. A flash of mottled brown. He tried to stop, but his momentum carried him forward. He felt a sharp electric pain shoot up his leg, just above the boot. He looked down. A large, angry rattlesnake, which had been sunning itself on the rock Malachi had been standing near, had struck him. Frank collapsed, his knife skittering away. The pain was immediate and blinding. Malachi stepped over him, picked up the knife, and tucked it into his own belt. He looked down at Frank, his bright blue eyes full of a terrible, serene understanding. "The silt will purify the venom," he said softly. "The water makes all things clean. It is time for you to meet the bride." He knelt, and with surprising strength, he lifted Frank over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. "Eris! Ben!" Frank screamed, but his voice was already weakening, the neurotoxin working fast. Malachi began the long, steady walk back toward the anomaly, carrying Frank like a lost sheep. "The groom is waiting," Malachi chanted as he walked. "The water is waiting. And Lillian? Lillian loves company." Eris sat with his back against the canyon wall, the heavy .45 resting in his lap. He hated the weapon. It felt brutish, a crude tool for a crude world. He preferred his trowel and his brushes. Ben was asleep, his breathing shallow, his face pale with pain from the ankle and the lingering terror of the night. It had been hours. The sun was high. Frank should have been back. "Frank?" Eris called out, his voice weak against the vast silence. Nothing. A cold dread, separate from the desert heat, began to seep into Eris. Frank was a survivor. If Frank didn't come back, it meant he couldn't. "Ben," Eris said, shaking the younger man's shoulder. "Wake up. We have to move." Ben groaned. "My ankle, I can't." "We have to try. Frank's not coming back." The realization hit Ben, and he sat bolt upright, his eyes wide with panic. "What? No. He's Frank. He'll be back. He's overdue," Eris said, his voice grim. "And I don't think that man, Malachi. I don't think he's just a hermit." "What do we do?" Eris looked at the steep canyon walls. They couldn't climb out, not with Ben's ankle. They couldn't follow Frank's path. There was only one other way out. The dry wash at the end of the box canyon. "We follow the wash," Eris said, making a decision. "Wash beds always lead downhill. Eventually, they'll lead us out of this canyon system." "But Frank's gone," Eris said, his voice flat. He helped Ben up, using a length of rope to fashion a sling for Ben's arm to go over his shoulder. They began the slow, agonizing shuffle down the wash. It was a miserable journey. The ground was loose sand and gravel, and every step was a fresh jolt of pain for Ben. Eris, unaccustomed to the physical labor, was breathing hard, the weight of the pistol in his pocket a constant, heavy reminder of their failure. After an hour, the wash narrowed. The red sandstone walls grew higher, closer together until they were in a slot canyon, barely 4 feet wide. The temperature dropped immediately. This feels familiar," Ben whispered, leaning against the wall. Eris stopped. He looked at the smooth, polished walls. He looked at the dark, damp silt under their feet. The smell hit him. Ozone, incense, and decay. "Oh no," Eris breathed. He looked up. The slot canyon was dark, the strip of sky above them a thin, blue ribbon. But ahead, the canyon opened up into a large, dark space. They hadn't been walking away. They had been walking into it. The dry wash was a spillway, an ancient overflow for the buried temple. "We're back," Ben whimpered, sinking to the ground. "We're back at the temple." "No, this is impossible," Eris said, digging in his pocket for his compass. He pulled it out. The needle spun wildly, then pointed straight down into the ground. "He was right," Ben sobbed. "Malachi, he said we were walking in circles." From the darkness ahead, a light flickered. A campfire. "Eris," Ben hissed. "Someone is in there." Eris raised the pistol, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. "Stay here. Don't make a sound. Don't leave me. I'll be right back. I have to see." Driven by a terrible academic need to know, Eris crept forward, emerging from the slot canyon into the main chamber. It was just as they'd left it. The massive pillars, the oppressive dark, the ceiling lost in shadow. The campfire was blazing near the far wall, and sitting by the fire was Frank. "Frank!" Eris cried, relief flooding him. He ran forward, stumbling through the silt. "Frank, thank God, we thought... He stopped. Frank was sitting with his back to a pillar, his legs stretched out. He was staring at the fire. He didn't turn. "Frank, what's wrong? Where's Malachi?" Eris reached him and put a hand on his shoulder. Frank slumped sideways, his body rigid. His eyes were wide open, staring, but they were milky and sightless. A thin line of dried blood and venom crusted at the corner of his mouth. 2 small dark puncture wounds were visible on his neck, just above the collar. Eris stumbled back, gagging. Frank hadn't been rescued. He'd been brought here. "He's a witness," a soft voice said from the darkness. Eris spun around, raising the gun. Malachi stepped out from behind another pillar. He was holding a bundle of burning sage, and the smoke wafted toward Eris, thick and cloying. You did this," Eris screamed. "The snake did its work," Malachi said calmly. "But the venom is unclean. It taints the vessel. He is not ready for the baptism. He is just a witness, like you." "Where's Ben?" Eris demanded, his finger tightening on the trigger. "The young one? He is impressionable," Malachi said. "He hears the water. He is needed for the ceremony." "What ceremony?" Malachi looked past Eris toward the center of the chamber. "The union, I told you. The purification is done. Now the final vows must be taken." Eris realized his mistake. He had left Ben alone. He turned to run back to the slot canyon, but Malachi was faster. The hermit threw the burning bundle of sage at Eris's feet. It exploded in a cloud of thick, acrid smoke. Eris coughed, his eyes watering, the smoke filling his lungs. It didn't just smell of sage. It smelled of that other, sweet, decaying thing. He felt his knees buckle. The world swam. The last thing he saw before he hit the silt was Malachi standing over him, his bright blue eyes filled with an ecstatic, terrifying light. "It is a holy day," Malachi whispered, "and you are my honored guests." When Eris awoke, his head was pounding. The air was thick with incense, so dense it was hard to breathe. He was lying on a pallet of woven reeds and filthy furs, in what appeared to be Malachi's living quarters. It was a small alcove carved into the temple wall, lit by several flickering tallow candles. The walls were covered in the same spiraling, obsessive glyphs he'd seen outside. Bones, animal, and perhaps Eris feared human, were stacked neatly in a corner. He sat up, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. He'd been drugged. The pistol was gone. "Frank," he mumbled, the memory returning. Frank was gone. He heard movement outside the alcove, the shush-shush of feet in the silt. "Ben," he called out. He crawled to the entrance of the alcove and looked out. The main chamber was no longer dark. It was lit by dozens of torches, placed in sconces on the great pillars. The light cast huge, dancing shadows. Ben was there. He was standing at the edge of the great black cistern, his back to Eris. He was swaying, as if to music Eris couldn't hear. Malachi was there too. He was standing on the opposite side of the pool. He was no longer in his rags. He was wearing something that looked like a priestly robe, stitched together from animal hides and faded, rotting cloth. "Ben, get away from the water!" Eris shouted. Ben didn't turn. "He cannot hear you," Malachi called across the pool, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "He is listening to the groom. The water speaks to him. It promises purity. What have you done to him?" "I have opened his ears," Malachi said. He was always listening. He just needed permission. He is a part of the ritual, the witness of the water. Eris staggered to his feet. He had to get to Ben. He began to walk around the perimeter of the pool, his legs like lead. "I would not interrupt the procession," Malachi warned. As Eris drew closer, he saw what was between Malachi and the pool. He had seen it from the shaft, but now it was horribly clear. It was a throne, a makeshift chair built of driftwood, stones, and strips of sinew, and seated on the throne was the bride. Eris stopped, his breath catching in his throat. It was a body, a human body, female, but it was ancient. It was desiccated, mummified by the dry air of the desert, or perhaps by some other darker process. The skin was like brown parchment, pulled taut over a delicate skeleton. It was tiny, frail, and it was dressed. It wore a tattered, moldering wedding gown, yellowed with age, the lace crumbling to dust. A filthy veil, dotted with what looked like dried flowers and bird skulls, was draped over its head, obscuring the face. This was the bundle. This was Lillian. My God, Eris whispered, a cold academic dread gripping him. Who is she? She is Lillian, Malachi said, his voice soft, full of reverence. He stepped toward the throne and gently, almost lovingly, adjusted the veil. She is the first bride, the consecrated, the pure. She's dead. She's been dead for decades. Death is an impurity, Malachi said, turning his bright eyes on Eris. It is a stain upon the soul. The world above is full of stains. Sickness, age, betrayal. But the water of the groom, it cleanses all. It makes all things new. It makes all things eternal. What did you do? Eris asked, his voice shaking. I found this place when I was a boy, Malachi said, his voice taking on the rhythm of a story told many times. My people, they came from the old world. They sought a new god in the desert. They found an old one instead. They found the groom. They built this temple for him. They gave him brides. They gave him their children. He gestured to the pool. But the world changed. The Utes came. The cavalry came. My people fled. They left the groom to starve. They abandoned their faith, all but my family. We were the keepers. My grandmother, my mother. They taught me the rites. They taught me how to listen to the water. Your mother, Eris said, connecting the horrifying puzzle pieces. Ilara, Malachi whispered, his face darkening. Her name was Ilara. She was the last keeper, but she grew weak. The world above, it poisoned her. She wanted to leave. She wanted to take me to the city. She wanted to abandon the groom. He paused, his hands clenching. She became unclean. What did you do, Malachi? Eris breathed. She fell ill. The fever took her. Her body was stained, but her soul was still pure, just trapped. The groom spoke to me. He told me how to save her, how to wash away the stain of the world, how to make her perfect, how to make her Lillian. Eris looked from the ecstatic hermit to the tiny mummified corpse in the wedding dress. He finally understood the title. He finally understood the horror. You baptized your mother. I purified Ilara. Malachi corrected him, his voice rising. I washed her in the holy water. I cleansed her of her sickness, of her betrayal, of her name. And from the water, she was reborn. She emerged as Lillian. My wife, the first bride of the Silt, the eternal mistress of the temple. He lifted his hands, his voice echoing in a triumphant, insane shout. He baptized his mother as his wife. Eris whispered, the words tasting like ash. You are a monster. I am a priest, Malachi shrieked. And today is my wedding day. The union is finally complete. The groom is satisfied. And you and the boy, you are the witnesses. You will see the final vow. From the pool, a sound began. A low, wet, sucking sound. The water in the center of the cistern began to bubble, not with heat, but with a cold, thick motion. Ben turned around. His eyes were not his own. They were milky, unfocused, and writhed with ecstasy. It's beautiful, Ben whispered. He's coming. The groom is here. The bubbling in the cistern grew louder. Eris, paralyzed by the sight of the desiccated bride and the sound from the water, felt a primal terror root him to the spot. Malachi was mad, but he was not alone in his madness. The temple itself, the entity he called the groom, was real. Ben, snap out of it, Eris yelled, desperation sharpening his voice. Ben only smiled, a blissful, terrible expression. He wants us to see, Eris. He wants us to be clean, too. Malachi raised his arms, chanting in a language Eris didn't recognize, a series of wet, guttural clicks and deep vowels. The sound seemed to vibrate in the silt beneath their feet. Eris knew he had only moments. He couldn't fight Malachi physically, and Ben was lost to him. He backed away, step by step, melting back into the shadows of the alcove where he'd awoken. Malachi, lost in his ecstatic ritual, didn't seem to notice. Aris scrambled back into the hermit's living space. He had to find a weapon. The pistol was gone. He rummaged through the piles of bones and filthy hides. There were stone knives, obsidian shards, but nothing that could stop a man fueled by such fervent delusion. Then he saw it, tucked beneath the sleeping pallet, a small wooden chest. It was not of the same primitive make as the rest of the furniture. It was old, carved, and European in design, bound with green, corroded brass. He ripped it open. Inside there were not weapons, but books. Several leather-bound journals, their pages brittle and yellowed, filled with cramped, spidery handwriting. This was not Malachi's scrawl. This was older. He opened the first one. The date, written in faded iron gall ink, was 1888. "We have left the oppression of the East," the first entry read. "We follow the prophet, but his new revelation is weak. He speaks of a God in the sky, but we have found a God in the earth. The Utes call it, he who waits in the silt. It demands sacrifice, and it offers preservation." Aris flipped through the pages. It was the journal of Malachi's ancestor, the leader of the schismatic cult that had founded this temple. They had diverted a deep, sacred spring to form the cistern. They believed the entity within it was a god of purity. "The water demands tribute. We gave it a lamb, and the flesh did not rot. We gave it a deer, and the fur remained pristine. It asks for a bride, a human vessel to share in its eternity. Tomorrow Bethia, the daughter of James, will be the first." Aris felt sick. He skipped ahead, grabbing another journal. The handwriting was different, more slanted, more frantic. The date was 1954. "My son Malachi has the gift. He hears the groom. The world outside is poison. The government men come with their maps and their atom bombs. They do not understand the purity of this place. They do not understand the sacred duty." This was Alara's journal, his mother. He turned to the last entry, the ink blotched, the handwriting shaky, as if written in a high fever. "The groom has become jealous. He calls to Malachi day and night. My son is changed. He looks at me, not as a mother. He looks at me as a vessel. He says the water calls for me. He says I am unclean. I must get him away from here. I must take him to the light. The fever is bad, but the water is worse. It promises life, but it is the end of all things." The entry ended there. Aris now knew the whole truth. Ilara hadn't just died. She had been resisting. Malachi, driven by the entity in the water and his own twisted lineage, saw her resistance as an impurity. He hadn't just been saving her from the fever, he had been punishing her for her betrayal, forcing her into the role the groom demanded. A terrible scream ripped through the temple, pulling Aris from the past. It wasn't Malachi. It was Ben. Aris scrambled out of the alcove, his heart pounding. Aris emerged to a scene of pure liturgical chaos. Ben was no longer standing by the pool. He was in it, waist-deep in the churning, oily black water. "Ben, no! It feels right," Ben shouted, his voice thick with a strange joy. He was splashing the water onto his face, rubbing it into his hair. "It's so cold. It's washing me clean, Aris. I can feel him. He's holding me." Malachi was on the other side, his arms raised, chanting wildly. "Yes, the witness. Baptize yourself in the groom's glory. Become clean. Become part of the union." The water around Ben was no longer just bubbling. It was moving. Something dark and immense, a shadow deeper than the water itself, was coiling around Ben's legs beneath the surface. "It's got me, Aris." Ben laughed, a high, thin, hysterical sound. "It's a baptism. It's drowning you, Ben," Aris screamed. He looked around desperately. He had to break the spell. He looked at the mummified bride on her throne. Lillian. Malachi was obsessed with the bride. That was the key. Aris grabbed one of the heavy torches from the wall. "Malachi!" Aris shouted, his voice cracking with authority he didn't feel. "The ritual is incomplete." Malachi's chant stuttered. He turned, his eyes wild. "What? No, it is perfect. The witness is purified." "You're wrong," Aris yelled, walking toward the throne. You said it yourself. I am a witness too, but I haven't been purified. And the bride, she is not ready. Lillian is perfect, Malachi hissed. Is she? Eris said, holding the torch dangerously close to the crumbling veil. She is covered in the dust of the world above. She is unclean. The word hit Malachi like a physical blow. He stared at the mummy, a look of profound horror dawning on his face. He had been so focused on Ben, he had neglected his bride. No, she is pure. Look at her, Eris insisted. The dust from my boot, it's on her dress. I've tainted her. It was a gamble, but it worked. Malachi's obsession fractured. He saw the perceived stain, and his ritualistic mind snapped. Unclean, he roared, a sound of pure agony. You have stained her. You have ruined the union. She must be washed. She must be baptized again. Malachi abandoned Ben. He abandoned the pool. He lunged toward Eris, but not to attack him. He ran to the throne and, with a desperate, loving cry, he gathered the tiny, desiccated mummy in his arms. I will make you clean, my love. My Lillian. The groom will forgive us. As Malachi turned with the body, Eris acted. He shoved the burning torch deep into the dry, woven reed throne. The ancient dry materials caught instantly, erupting in a pillar of fire. Ben, now, get out of the water! Eris screamed. The sudden column of flame seemed to break Ben's trance. He looked down and, for the first time, saw the dark, serpentine thing coiled around his waist. He screamed, a real scream this time, one of pure terror. Malachi, seeing the throne, his holy altar in flames, howled in rage. Desecration! You have burned the holy seat! He turned on Eris. The mummified bride still clutched to his chest. He was no longer a priest. He was a cornered animal. Ben was struggling, trying to climb out of the cistern, but the thing in the water was holding him fast, pulling him deeper. Eris, help me! It's not letting go! Eris was trapped. Ben was drowning. The throne was burning. And Malachi was advancing, his blue eyes burning with a murderous, righteous fire. The temple, which had been a place of cold, dark reverence, was now a hell of smoke, shadow, and screaming. The burning throne cast wild, terrifying shadows that danced across the glyphs, making the carved walls seem to writhe and coil. Eris grabbed another torch from the wall. He had no weapon but fire. Let him go, Malachi! Eris yelled, backing away. You burned it! Malachi shrieked, his voice breaking. He was holding the mummified body of his mother like a shield. You burned the bridal bed! She has nowhere to rest! The groom will be displeased. As if in response, the water in the cistern exploded. The thing holding Ben surfaced. It was not a creature of flesh, but of silt. A massive semi-solid pseudopod of black mud and ancient water rose from the pool. It was the groom, a sentient, chthonic intelligence from the deep earth. Ben screamed as the mud tendril lifted him, dangling him over the water. It's real, Eris stammered, his rational, academic mind shattering completely. The glyphs, the journals, the madness, it was all real. Malachi saw the groom holding Ben, and his fanaticism returned. Yes, he is displeased. He demands a sacrifice for the desecration. He will take the unclean witness. No, Eris shouted. He looked at Malachi at the body in his arms. He knew what he had to do. He doesn't want Ben, Malachi. He wants her. He wants the bride. Malachi froze. No, she is my wife. She is his, Eris countered, his mind racing. You said it yourself. You prepared her for him. You are just the priest. You are the keeper, but you've kept her too long. The union must be consummated. Give him the bride. The silt tendril holding Ben tightened. Ben choked, his face turning blue. Malachi was torn. His entire life, his entire madness, was built on two conflicting beliefs, that Lillian was his wife, and that she was the groom's bride. Give her to him, Malachi, Eris roared, gesturing to the pool. Fulfill your sacred duty. Complete the baptism. The hermit looked at the struggling boy. He looked at the burning throne. He looked at the massive, dark entity rising from the water. And finally, he looked down at the desiccated face of his mother. Lillian. "You are right," he whispered, a tear cutting a clean path through the grime on his cheek. She is not for me. She is for the water. She is for the groom." He began to walk slowly toward the edge of the cistern. "I baptized her once for purity," Malachi chanted, his voice regaining its rhythmic, priestly quality. "I baptize her now. For union." He stood at the edge, holding the tiny mummy. "Lillian, my mother, my wife, my bride, go to your groom." With a gentle, loving gesture, Malachi tossed the mummified body into the center of the pool. The body, with its waterlogged dress, hit the surface and sank instantly. The effect was immediate. The massive silt tendril holding Ben recoiled, as if struck. It released Ben, who collapsed onto the edge of the cistern, gasping and coughing. The bubbling stopped. The water grew still. The entity had received its offering. Ben scrambled away from the pool, crab walking backward through the silt, his eyes white with terror. Malachi stood at the edge, staring into the black water where his bride had vanished. He looked empty. His purpose, the central pillar of his entire life, was gone. He had given away his mother, his wife. Eris ran to Ben, grabbing him by the arm. "Ben, can you walk?" I think so," Ben choked. "The slot canyon, the way we came in. Go, now." Eris shoved Ben toward the narrow opening. Ben staggered, then broke into a painful, limping run. Eris turned back. Malachi hadn't moved. He was a statue of grief, silhouetted against the burning throne. "It is finished," Malachi whispered to the water. "It's over, Malachi," Eris said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Come with us. We can get you help." Malachi turned his head slowly. His bright blue eyes were no longer ecstatic. They were flat, empty, and utterly devoid of life. "Help?" he said. "No. The keeper does not leave the temple. The priest does not leave the altar. And the husband does not leave his bride." Before Eris could react, Malachi took one step forward and fell, stiff as a board, into the black, silent water of the cistern. There was a small splash, a few bubbles, and then he too was gone. Eris stared at the water, his mind numb. The hermit was gone. The bride was gone. The groom was satisfied. "Eris, come on!" Ben's voice echoed from the mouth of the slot canyon. The fire from the throne was spreading, catching on the other dry reeds and firs in Malachi's living area. The smoke was becoming thick, stinging Eris's eyes. He turned and ran. He caught up with Ben in the narrow, dark canyon. Ben was leaning against the wall, his chest heaving. He's gone?" Ben panted. "Both of them," Eris said. "They're in the water. And the thing? I think it's dormant. It got what it wanted. We have to get out," Ben said, pushing himself off the wall. "The smoke. We'll suffocate." They began the trek, half walking, half crawling, up the dry wash. It was steeper than Eris remembered. Ben's ankles screamed with every step, but the terror drove him on. The smoke from the burning temple followed them, a thick, acrid cloud that made the air unbreathable. They climbed, slipping on the loose gravel, their lungs burning. The small strip of sky above them seemed impossibly far away. "I can't," Ben gasped, collapsing. "I can't make it." "Yes, you can," Eris said, grabbing him, pulling him up. The academic was gone, replaced by something hard and desperate. "Frank is dead. Malachi is dead. We are not dying in this ditch. Get up." He hauled Ben to his feet. They pressed on, step after agonizing step. The smoke thinned as they climbed, replaced by the cool, clean air of the upper canyon. After what felt like a lifetime, they emerged from the slot canyon into the box canyon where they had camped. The sun was high and brutal. They were covered in soot, silt, and Ben's drying blood. They were alive. "The radio?" Eris said, his voice raw. Frank took the radio, back to the ridge." "Eris, that's Miles. We have no choice." They began the hike. Eris took Ben's weight, and they moved at a snail's pace. The desert, which had seemed malevolent and alien, now felt normal. The heat, the snakes, the scorpions, they were just nature. They were understandable. They were not the cold, ancient, sentient hunger of the temple. They reached the ridge just before sunset. The wreckage of the jeeps was a black scar in the canyon below, and there, lying on the rock where Malachi had dropped it, was the radio. Eris grabbed it. He extended the antenna, his hands shaking. He clicked the receiver. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Eris Thorne, Interior Survey Team Delta. We are stranded. We have injuries. Requesting immediate extraction. Scorpion's Tail Mesa. Over." He waited, his heart pounding. For a long, terrible second, there was only static. And then a voice. Crackling, distant, but gloriously human. "Repeat your location, Delta. We read you. You are faint. Repeat location." "Shh! We're here!" Eris screamed into the handset. "We're here! We are on the ridge! We read you! We are here!" He collapsed onto the rock, tears of relief and exhaustion cutting paths through the grime on his face. Ben sat beside him, weeping silently. They sat on the ridge, watching the sun set, the radio crackling with the promise of rescue. They were safe. They had survived. The helicopter arrived the next morning. The official story was a simple one, crafted by Eris during the long, cold night on the ridge. There had been a seismic event, a flash flood in the canyons. Frank Coulter had been caught in a rockslide while trying to move the jeeps to safer ground. The vehicles were lost. Ben Carter had broken his ankle during the chaos. They were lucky to be alive. No one questioned it. The Scorpion's tail was known for its instability. Frank Coulter was listed as lost, presumed dead. A recovery team was deemed too dangerous. Eris and Ben were flown to a hospital in Flagstaff. Ben's ankle was set. Eris was treated for smoke inhalation and dehydration. They were debriefed by a man from the Department of the Interior. Eris repeated the story, his voice flat, his eyes dead. Ben, heavily medicated, just nodded. The survey of the Scorpion's tail was canceled indefinitely. The area was declared a geologic hazard zone, forbidden to all federal employees. 2 weeks later, Eris was back in his cluttered office at the University of Chicago. The damp, gray chill of the city felt alien. He was surrounded by books, by artifacts, by the rational. But none of it made sense. He would wake up in the middle of the night, choking, smelling phantom smoke and incense. He would stare into his coffee cup, and the black liquid would seem to swirl, as if something were moving just beneath the surface. He tried to write. He tried to document what he'd seen. He sketched the glyphs from memory. He wrote down Alara's journal entries. He wrote about Malachi. He titled the paper, "A Case Study of Induced Theophanic Hysteria in an Isolated Subject." He tried to explain it all: the isolation, the inbreeding of the cult, the hallucinogenic spores from a desert mushroom, the toxic gases from the spring. He explained Malachi's psychosis, a transference of the Oedipal complex onto a localized chthonic deity. He explained the groom as a mass hallucination, a shared psychosis. He wrote it all down, and he knew, deep in his bones, that every word of it was a lie. He knew what he saw. He had seen a god of the silt, and he had seen a man give it his mother as a wife. He received a letter from Ben a month later. Ben was back in California. He had been honorably discharged from the survey. He was living near the ocean. "I don't go near the water, Doc," the letter read. "Not even the beach. When I close my eyes, I can still feel it, the cold. I just wanted to say, thanks for pulling me out." Eris put the letter away. He took his paper, all 200 pages of psychological analysis, and he burned it in his fireplace. Some things were not meant to be known. Some tombs were not meant to be opened. 5 years passed. It was 1978. Eris Thorne was no longer a field archaeologist. He was a tenured professor, a man who chain-smoked in his office and was known for his brilliant but deeply unsettling lectures on the psychology of dead religions. His students found him fascinating and terrifying. He had buried the Scorpion's tail deep. One rainy October afternoon, a package arrived at his office. It had no return address. The postmark was from Kanab, Utah. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, there was no letter. There was only a single object, wrapped in oilcloth. It was a small, leather-bound journal. He recognized the spidery, frantic handwriting instantly. It was Ilara's journal, the one he had left behind in the burning temple. He opened it. The pages were damp, warped, and smelled of mud and a faint, sweet decay. Tucked into the last page was a single photograph, a faded black and white image from the 1940s. It was a young woman, Ilara, standing in the desert sun. She was beautiful, with dark, haunted eyes. Standing next to her was a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, with bright, intense eyes. Malachi. Eris dropped the journal as if it were on fire. How? How had this gotten out? The temple was sealed, the entrance buried. Malachi was gone. He stared at the postmark, Kanab. That was the closest town to the scorpion's tail. He spent the night sleepless, the journal sitting on his desk, radiating a palpable cold. He had a choice. He could burn this too. He could forget. He could continue his safe, rational life, or he could go back. He knew it was madness. He knew it was a trap, but the academic, the man who had to know, was still alive inside him. Who had sent this? Had someone else found the temple? Was it possible Malachi had not been alone? The next morning, Eris Thorne booked a flight to Flagstaff and rented a 4-wheel drive truck. He told his department he was taking a sabbatical for field research. He drove into the red desert, guided by the old hypothetical maps and a terrible, familiar dread. It took him 2 days to find the mesa. The landscape had changed, but the deep, unnatural chill of the place was the same. The government hazard signs were still posted, riddled with bullet holes from local target shooters. He found the depression, the shallow artificial dip in the sandstone. The rocks Frank had used to seal the shaft were still there, undisturbed. Eris felt a wave of relief. It was over. The journal was a fluke. A hiker must have found the Slot Canyon entrance by chance, found the journal in the wreckage, and, seeing Eris's name mentioned in Frank's old notes, mailed it. He was being paranoid. He turned to leave. That's when he heard it. The chanting. It was faint, coming from the other side of the mesa. Eris crept through the juniper, his heart in his throat. He reached the edge of the mesa and looked down into the canyon system. There, on a ledge far below, was a small, smoldering campfire. And there was a figure. It was not Malachi. It was a woman. She was young, with long matted hair, dressed in scraps of canvas and denim. She was rocking back and forth, chanting the same tuneless, guttural dirge. Eris watched, horrified. As he stared, the woman stood and walked to the edge of her ledge. She picked up a bundle, a small, dark bundle wrapped in hides, and tossed it over the edge. It fell 1,000 feet, vanishing into the darkness of a deep, unmapped fissure in the canyon floor. A fissure Eris had not seen before. A back door to the temple. "The groom is fed," the woman sang out, her voice echoing up the canyon. She turned, and Eris saw her face. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s. Her eyes were bright blue, clear, and absolutely, ecstatically insane. She looked up, as if sensing him. She stared right at Eris, a mile away on the ridge. She smiled. "The witness has returned," she shouted, her voice carrying on the wind. "He has come back for the new baptism. He has come to meet the bride." Eris stumbled backward. This wasn't Malachi's legacy. This was the temple's. The groom was awake. And it was hungry. The woman at the bottom of the canyon lifted her hands. "He is waiting for you, Eris. The water is clean. Lillian is gone, but the groom needs a new bride, and she is almost ready." She gestured, not to the fissure, but to a small tent behind her. From inside the tent, a baby cried. Eris turned and ran. He ran back to his truck, his breath ragged, his mind fractured. He drove all night, not stopping until he hit the lights of the city, the red dust of the scorpion's tail clinging to his boots. He never went back. He resigned his position, moved to a coastal city, and spent the rest of his life as far from the desert and as far from any still dark water as he could get. But he knew, until the day he died, that the temple was still there. The keeper was dead, but the faith lived on, and the groom, the thing in the silt, was patient. It was still waiting for its witnesses. It was still waiting for its bride.